Welcome to Finding Proof, where we discuss all things early stage VC.
We're your hosts, Thanasis and Jenny of the Proof Fund, and our goal is to get to know the best seed and early stage VCs out there.
In this episode, we're speaking with Stephen Marcus of Riot Ventures, which is a Los Angeles-based fund that invests in seed and early stage companies where hardware is a component of their solution. Steve, thanks for joining us today. You and I have known each other for about 10 years since we worked on a couple of deals together. So I'm excited to have you on as one of the first few guests on our show. Tell us a little bit about Riot Ventures.
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, we came up with the idea for Riot Ventures. It's really a fund focused on companies that are leveraging a significant amount of technology to solve big, hairy problems. And I think when we first got going, what we had noticed was there were a lot of businesses, a lot of industries that were being ignored by venture capitalists. Most VCs had become software investors by no fault of their own. I think that's where a lot of the opportunity was in the venture ecosystem. Why take on any technology risk when you don't need to? And then I think that market really ran its course. I think there are a lot of businesses that are interesting businesses that leverage technology. And there weren't a lot of practitioners left in the venture business to invest in those businesses. They just didn't understand them, didn't come from electrical and mechanical or traditional science backgrounds. They just were unfamiliar with how to invest in it. And I think technologies had changed so significantly. Like the technologies of our time in the last 5 years have evolved so much that the economies to get involved there had just dropped. And they started to look a lot more like software businesses economically because you could get started with them for $1 million. We've had companies in the robotic space that have gotten started with $350,000 of invested capital, built a product, got first customers, were revenue generating with almost a pittance in capital. And so we just said, look, there's an opportunity here to build a firm whose ethos is leverage technology, go after some big, lucrative problems, and really support those entrepreneurs through and through. And I think my background, having been in infrastructure, having built a lot of physical, product, just lent itself to being at the forefront of venture capital there.
And you have actually founded, I think it was 6 hardware and software companies prior to being an investor. What made you really interested in making the switch to the investing side of things and being a VC?
Starting companies is hard. I'm a masochist, I guess, having started a handful of them and some more successful than others. It's hard. And I think investing, I looked at this as my 7th company. I said, look, this is a startup like any other. There's an opportunity here. I'm a capitalist. I want to make money. It just made sense to serve this market as a entrepreneur. And having come from the business, I grew up building mobile phone networks, soup to nuts. And I'll tell you how I got into it. So I was originally the equivalent of a domain squatter in the wireless business. I actually bought and sold a significant amount of wireless spectrum licenses. It's a really niche business. There's maybe 100 of us that kind of do it actively. It's all the usual suspects. And I got started doing licensing, some mergers and acquisitions in it, where I bought some other licenses. And I built these portfolios that I would sell to Native American tribes, local governments, other businesses. I really just had a lack of being, if you will, a wireless landowner. And as a result of that, just like in the real estate business, when you're in the land business, you start to be a developer. You start to move forward in the value chain. You work with manufacturers who can build technologies to be using those licenses. I got into the cell tower business, which is a natural extension. I was a wireless carrier in many markets, built carriers, mission-specific carriers for people, retail handsets and equipment. I ran the whole gamut of, if you're a landowner, just like in the real estate business, you run all the plays in order to maximize the use of your land. And so investing, ever since I had made a buck, I had, sold some licenses, made a good chunk of money when I was a teenager, and started to learn to invest in other businesses. And having been an angel investor for a long time, I worked with Thanasis in points in my career where I was in between gigs. I worked with Thanasis and his team. and got a real understanding of how to be an investor. And I really love it. I love working with ultra talented people that I can't hire. These people are unhireable. They don't want to come work, for you. They want to do their own thing. I get inspired every day by supporting them, and they're just good. And I recognize talent. I think I have an eye for who's going to be successful, and persuading them to take my capital and be along for the ride and help them in very strategic ways. Sometimes it's an hour conversation, sometimes it's longer, but at the end of the day, I can sympathize with a lot of what they do. And I think that's what makes you a good VC, is that you can understand operationally what's happening. You understand the challenges that they deal with every day. And it's a great business. I think I just enjoy it.
Yeah. And it does go a long way when you're able to relate to the entrepreneurs as well, and know what they've been going through and all the struggles, and also the rewarding aspects of being a founder. Actually, on that note, what would you say is the most challenging thing about being an entrepreneur and the most rewarding?
The most challenging thing to be an entrepreneur is that you're making a business that relies on its primary input is usually talent. And I think making ultra talented people successful, making that machine that is your business operate at high efficiency, high throughput, is the hardest part of being a CEO. I think it's really making all the trains move on time. So you spend a good 50% of your time on people, just hiring, trying to make sure you have the right people in the right place, make sure you're making the right decisions. Strategy obviously is important, but I think you spend the bulk of your time on people. Finance is a big function. These days, I think what's hard about being an entrepreneur, and why I think hard tech or deep tech is an opportunity space, is we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs who are moving, who are from traditional, let's say, software businesses, starting to get into businesses that have some physical component. And the reason they're doing that is because it's technically challenging and it's hard to imitate. I think today's entrepreneurs you catch on a good idea, the word travels so fast, and all of a sudden you get, your $10 million in revenue, you think you're a hero. And then suddenly you have 6 competitors because everybody said, geez, that's a really good idea. And so you just find your hand-to-hand combat out there trying to defend your turf that you pioneered. I think when you go into a very technical business, if you go into robotics, there's maybe 1,000 roboticists in the world. And if you get the idea you want to do it, you still need to develop the expertise. And it's hard to find those people. It's hard to get them on board in your business, and then for you to go out there and compete. So it's not easy to imitate. Look at Elon with Tesla. He published all his IP. He said, hey, here you go. You can have everything you want. You can have the battery tech. You can have motors. You can have whatever it is. Here are the blueprints. And it's been impossible for people to catch him because there's a learning curve. It's hard. But I think entrepreneurs these days, at the end of the day, it is a people business. And that's probably the hardest thing to deal with.
Give us an example of a company that kind of exemplifies, in your view, what you talked about in terms of difficult challenge, great entrepreneurs, had a breakthrough, difficult to copy.
Yeah. I guess I have a couple examples. 2 that come to mind are Desktop Metal and Subspace. And I'll talk about Desktop Metal to begin with. So Desktop Metal was a metal 3D printing company, and now they're much more diversified into some other areas. Take the iPhone, for example. The 5G iPhone, it takes 1 CNC machine a day to cut the case in an iPhone. 1 a day. And if you're going to make millions of them, think about how many CNC machines you need to have. It's just a force. And it becomes a significant part of the cost equation. So Desktop Metal can print 30,000 of them an hour. It's 100 times the speed at 1/20th the cost. And I think that they're also in a part of the market where you needed to perfect a bunch of technologies to make that work. It wasn't just enough that, hey, we invented this. We need to actually figure out how to make all this stuff work and at this level of throughput. The other is Subspace. Subspace is building the world's fastest internet backbone. So it's like Akamai on steroids. And what they're building is for the 1% of the traffic on the internet that needs to be there absolutely as fast as possible, they charge more than the other 99%. One of their first customers is a massive multiplayer gaming company. And the idea was that latency drives the player experience. And you need to have, how quick can you shoot the gun, or how quick can you move around the corner? Milliseconds matter. And many gaming companies have tied milliseconds to revenue, because the better player experience, the more you engage, the more you spend. All those dynamics are what really drive the game. The people that are on this team are unbelievable. The founders came from the telephony side where jitter and latency were really important. And one of them had family's been in data centers forever. The other one's been a network engineer forever, is one of the top 1% network engineers in the world. They have somebody who built all of Google Video, Netflix, Facebook Live infrastructure. They have the head of software for all of SpaceX who worked in DARPA. Their head of sales was the head of sales for Akamai Gaming. And their COO is the guy who built Riot Games, built this network for themselves. They spent $100 million to build their own version of this. They spent $25 million a year to keep the lights on. And the guy that built that is the COO for Subspace. But I think it's not easy to copy. There are competitors out there who've tried it, and it is hard. It is incredibly hard to make all that soup work and be the fastest in the world. It's like building a Formula race car.
These are very futuristic, right? A lot of the ones that you're talking about are very futuristic. Interestingly, there's been a number of VCs that have come into that space in the last 5 to 10 years. There's Lux Capital, ENIAC. There's a number of funds that are focusing on deeper tech. So talk about that and where you think that is going and how you differentiate yourself in that market.
Yeah, I think, look, when we got into the business, the jury was still out on Lux. For example, Lux has done a lot of what we're talking about, and I think demonstrated to the market that there's returns here, that there are viable businesses to be built, and their track record started to mature. And so they got bigger, more money went to them. They have a $500 million fund and another $500 million opportunity fund. And I think DCVC was also there. I think that Eclipse is there. You know, there's a lot of, we're not all doing the same things. You drew a Venn diagram, there would be some overlap there. And I think what they've done in the market is they've proved it, and then they moved up market. They moved to Series A, to Series B, C. So they left, I think, a big part of this institutional seed market where we play, and we're emerging as the top player there. I think there's a lot of tourists in the space. So there's a member at every fund who says that they do deep tech or hard tech. And I think COVID, did impact a lot of the tourists. I think a lot of the tourists are going back to their roots and saying, hey, we're going to run the old plays we ran. So I think the capital markets have changed some, but I think institutional seed was an opportunity space that I think was born out of proof that have come from Lux and DCVC and Playground and a whole bunch of Section 32. Bill Maris is in it, and although he focused a little bit more on healthcare, there's a lot of really savvy investors, but they just focus on Series A and up, we'll call it.
What's the most futuristic company in your portfolio?
Yeah, there's not a lot of public information on this yet, but there's a company in our portfolio that I think is trying to revolutionize rail freight. I think that the traditional, when you think of freight, you connect 100 cars to an engine. And I think the future of rail there'll be no engines anymore. Those will be gone. And you'll just see a train car move by itself. And it'll move by itself because the economics are so much better. Like, we can leave port, it can be loaded by itself and move on. And I probably didn't know that. I didn't know this. You need 100 cars to make it economical. And you need to bring it 500 miles away in order to all the numbers to work out. But I think that will radically change. I think everybody's investing in trucking, trying to put more trucks on the road and move them autonomously. And when I actually think that rail, you'll see a huge innovation come in a really old industry, and they'll just move by themselves.
As a futurist, what other trends do you foresee in the future with machines and technology?
Look, I'm big into transportation. I think everybody loves to talk about transportation. There's air, land, and sea, and rail. So I just talked about rail. There's less humans and less concern about autonomy in trains. I think air autonomy will be here before people think it will happen. I think it's becoming safer. There's 170 companies working on electric vertical takeoff and landing. Huge amounts of capital being put into it. I think that is real and will happen sooner than people think. I think the next 5 years, there will be autonomy in the form of freight, no brainer. That's coming. I think commercial passenger travel probably is 10 years out just from a safety standpoint, but I think it's near term. And I think that vehicular traffic, I think, is a little bit farther. I think it's 10 years plus. It's the most dangerous aspect of autonomy. Everybody wants it. I think there's some hesitancy by people to get into an autonomous vehicle without it being ultra safe and perfectly figured out. Lots of stuff still to come there. I think sea autonomy is certainly something that will come sooner. Nobody really wants to be a sea captain anymore. Nobody really wants to be a crew. You'll see a lot of drone ships. It's less risky. So I think those will all happen. I think the thing that will happen last will be road autonomy. You want other ones?
Sure. Why not?
I think that I'm a big believer in there's human augmentation. And then I think there's also this area of regenerative medicine that I think will happen far sooner than people think. I think we've seen a whole slew of companies that are working on massive scale in many different dimensions, like being able to grow blood supply, artificial blood supply in mass. It's a big donor system today. You're seeing things like Moderna, which will have amazing platforms for disease management. You'll see just radical change in that market. I think people are growing organs at a scale that you haven't imagined before. We actually have a company in our portfolio that's doing drug discovery by growing human brain tissue from stem cells. It's a manufacturing plant. We do it at scale. We grow 100,000 brain organoids, which are basically 1 to 2 millimeter, not fully developed brains, but brain tissue. And the idea is to discover cures for brain diseases like schizophrenia or Alzheimer's. And no one has a testing platform in that realm, but we've been able to achieve large scale reproductive organs. It is done at a scale now today. That's today's science. The next 5 to 10 years in medicine are going to be wow.
I believe it, especially after COVID, after
sure.
a situation like this. Yeah, and it should be.
I think that also we're trying to maximize human performance. I think that man and machine, this is a crazy one, man and machine are going to start to merge. I think that you'll start seeing people incorporate more and more technology into their bodies. And I think we have the surface capabilities now to track a lot of things in the body, but you'll see we'll have a depth of understanding of the body and things will just start to merge.
What do you think of Musk's Neuralink?
I've spent a lot of time in the brain-machine interface space. I think that it's an amazing approach. I think people are going to be very hesitant to get something implanted in the brain in order to get the telemetry out. I think Brian Johnson, who's at Kernel, was also working on something competitive in an invasive way. He has a non-invasive approach, and I actually looked at another company that was also in the non-invasive space. That's happening. The depth of understanding we will have of the brain will transform a lot of medicine, but will also transform a lot of the way we interact with machines. I think he's right on. I'm skeptical that somebody will get that implanted, but obviously if you're managing a disease or you're managing something where you can't function without this implant, sure, you mean, of course, why wouldn't you? However, if you want to interact with a game, if you're like, hey, I want to be a really good game player, but you got to go get Neuralink installed in your head, I'm not sure that's going to happen right away, but would you put on a cap that gave you the same resolution? I think our children and our grandchildren are not going to use these input devices. I don't think you're going to have a keyboard anymore, or a mouse, or you're not going to use your fingers. That whole chain of how you interact with machines is going away. And users in the future are just going to think, they're going to interact by just thinking about it. It's going to be a whole new way to interact with a machine, but that is absolutely happening. We have the data, we have the resolution. Brain-machine interface is a hot area for sure.
So I know you started in Boston, and that's kind of when we met. And Boston, of course, as a market is traditionally very fertile in terms of developing these kind of advanced technologies, but then you moved to LA, right? Why'd you move to LA?
Half our portfolio is in California, and the majority of the portfolio companies are in LA. I think LA, look, in any tech ecosystem, you look for where somebody's built a business there, and the diaspora from that business starts other companies. People are, especially if they're successful. And I think what's happened in SoCal is that SpaceX is here, Tesla is here. We have a lot of interesting space companies. Relativity Space is here. Snap, I think, showed that you could build a really big company here in LA, a really good technology company, a really big one. But I think a lot of hard tech companies are being born. We see SpaceX founders every week that are starting a business. They're instilled with some confidence at SpaceX. They work with the best of the best. They want to stay in SoCal. It's a great lifestyle. It's close to the beach. Everybody wants to be here. It's a great place to live. And I think that is an incredible draw. When I bring somebody from Boston to LA and I say, hey, look, this is what LA is. Everybody wants to be here. They just want a job. And so I think that there's a huge, massive talent here. It used to be the aerospace capital of the world. And I think hard tech wise, we see manufacturing businesses, we see transportation businesses being born here. it makes sense for a lot of the categories we look at. We've got a defense company in San Diego. I think that Anduril is one of the largest names in the new age defense business. They're in Orange County. We're backing another one called Shield that's in San Diego. Skydio's in California. Just everybody's here. So I think it's just LA is a very fertile place to be. And there really aren't any deep tech investors. There's a handful here.
Has there been an increase in the number of VCs that can support a fertile ecosystem similar to the Bay Area in LA?
Yeah, I think, look, LA still imports a lot of capital. I think 2/3 of the capital is still imported. So there's not a lot of it, still an opportunity space for indigenous capital. Certainly from a Series A, B perspective, there are a few firms. And even if you put all the seed money together, I don't think you would cover everything that was an opportunity in LA. I just don't think there's enough there yet. And certainly in hard tech, that's a very short list. We tend to loop in investors from outside LA because we can't find enough of it locally. So it's an opportunity to do that. But I think a lot of San Francisco folks want to live in LA. It's pretty funny because
San Franciscan, absolutely.
For sure. You just out and about, you'll see people from every venture fund, every San Francisco venture fund is here all the time. I don't think they want to tell the world that they're here in LA. But we find a lot of people want to be here, which is really supportive of companies. When you invest in an LA company and they need capital, sometimes you would think the geography is a problem, but people want to be here. And so every fund, Sequoia and GV and Founders Fund and you name it, Lux, everybody has a person who's here 100% of the time.
And they're all based in where? Santa Monica?
They're around. I'd say that the west side of LA tends to be where everybody wants to be. They call it Silicon Beach, west of the 405. From a traffic perspective, there's some people who live in West Hollywood, but for the most part, everybody's in Santa Monica, Pacific Palisades, Playa Vista, Manhattan Beach.
Yeah, it was my dream to live in Manhattan Beach after college. And I really regret not doing that. I know.
Yeah, it's still possible.
And ask us, I have something to tell you. No, that's awesome. Yeah, I love LA. My sister was in Pasadena for 7 years at Caltech too. So she loved it.
It's a great place. And everybody who leaves LA can't, whenever I talk to them, they're like, I'd love to go back. It's a vortex. It's easy to persuade people to come to LA.
Definitely. I believe it. So now we're going to move into our 4 standard question segment. And the goal here is just that we ask 4 standard questions to all of our guests to get to know them on a more personal level. So the first one is, if you could have a magic wand and change or improve something about the VC industry, what would it be and why?
Man, there's so many things. I think the dirty underbelly of VC is the thing that I always want to talk about, which is, what do you do when you fail as a venture-backed founder? A lot of VCs just try to kick it under the rug and be like, hey, it didn't work. See you later. Have a nice life. Reality is that a lot of these businesses don't work. I founded a company that didn't work. And it doesn't mean you have any less potential or that you won't be successful. I always wanted to create like a little bit of a country club for people who failed as a way to get their confidence back and put them back on the show and get going.
Awesome. Yep.
So that's something I would do a little bit more. I think that venture doesn't do well, but that we at Riot are changing as well. We have had companies that have failed, and we feel like we're close with the founders, and we embrace that they want to get onto something new, and we tell them, hey, we're here to support you, and we work at trying to get them back on the bus and working on businesses again.
Okay, great. And as a side question, what do you think are the top 3 characteristics of a founder? Because it sounds like you're obviously such a people-centric fund, and that's what you focus on. Yeah. So I'd love to know that.
The top 3 characteristics. Obviously, I think what we look for is, can this person build a team? Number 1. Are they good at sourcing talent and persuading the best to work with them? Because if you're not good at that, it doesn't matter. 2, financing. If you can't raise money, we want to be in a process that's run well. We want to make sure that the founder understands how to raise money, how to use that as a tool in the tool bag, and is really savvy. And if they can't do that, then great businesses take a lot of capital. And I think that if you can't raise money, if that's not one of your primary muscles, you're probably not a fit for us. And I think third is that we look for domain expertise, like somebody who's just a world-class thought leader, understands what they're doing, knows what their customer eats for breakfast, just can think 3 moves ahead. Has to be a pro, has to be somebody where you look around the table and you're like, you're the world's best person at X. Have to be.
And those are great insights. So if you weren't a VC and money was not an option, what career would you have?
I always wanted to be a police detective.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad always sold radios to police departments when I was a kid. So I've been in a police department, just been in a police station my whole life. And I love the job of being a detective. I think just putting clues together, trying to understand what happened. Sometimes it's the things that are really small to pay attention to. My dad has helped people solve crimes. I've helped people solve crimes. I just get a thrill of just the mystery of tracking things and trying to figure out what's happened, the whodunit.
Yeah. We might have to have a separate podcast on you solving crimes, because now I'm really curious.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, we definitely have. And it's all the crime TV shows I can't get enough of. So there's so many. There's so many. I just love them.
Right.
And I remember there was a show, White Collar, that I really got into.
Yeah.
I felt like Italian Singer and Castle and Boston Legal and all these shows. Just, I've always been curious about that.
All right. Well, the third question is, who is someone you look up to and why?
So when I was in business school 10 years ago, we had the opportunity to meet Warren Buffett. I had dinner with the man. And it's before they sold it for whatever, millions of dollars. I sat across from him and really, we asked him a whole slew of questions. And he's one of the people I look up to. And I know it's a classic example. Having met the man, he's just an ordinary guy. He's like a ordinary grandpa, helps his kids deliver newspapers, drives himself around in a Cadillac that he bought, he had owned for years and years, lives in the same house. He was just a calm, cool, collected guy who found a niche in the business. He's in the estate transfer business, is what he only works with families, really, whose businesses have grown to be massive and can't pass to the next generation. So they become part of Berkshire Hathaway. And I think he just found a niche. He owned it. I think he's a truth teller, but he does it in the nicest way. He's got a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment out of life and been incredibly successful, and it's never really gone to his head. And I read all his stuff and I watch his annual meetings and love the man.
Yeah, it's a very values-oriented person and just an incredible role model. Definitely. That's a great one to pick. Lastly, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
It's the thing that I try to do all the time, but it's hard for me because I'm a fairly impatient person, but it's to take your time. I am a pilot. And when I became a pilot, the things that I noticed were, I thought it was all about reaction time. Hey, you got an emergency. You just need to be able to take the bull by the horns and react really quickly. And what you realize is that a 20,000-hour captain of American Airlines moves at a snail's pace, just like a sloth. And you can't figure out why, but it really is because you want to make sure you're doing things correctly and make sure you pay attention to all the details. And I think take your time. It's just universal. Take a moment, think about things very carefully. Don't make rash decisions, because the odds are you're not going to be lucky. You might get lucky, but most of the time that decision will work out better if you think about it. Take your time, go through the motions, make sure it's the right one. I think that's hard. It's something I try to do every day.
It's great advice. Something we could all probably learn from too.
For sure.
Steve, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate and enjoyed listening to you.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. Let me know when I can come back.
And follow us on Twitter @ProofVC or on our website at proof.vc.